When you hear about the fighter Slingshot, the first thing that you will be able to come up with for a description is fast-moving ranged fighter who deals poke damage towards a single target. His title is literally the Mosquito. Slingshot is a simple and popular character and fairly iconic, seeing as he has been in the game as one of the original 5 fighters, and is the only one left who hasn't received a large redesign implemented into the game yet. Despite these facts, there are still a couple of glaring issues with his gameplay. Slingshot has a bunch of problems that all connect to each other, which all drag him down. Remember this description from the start of the video? If you don't, make sure you take a good look at it now so you can remember it later. This will become important. Now, you might be thinking, how is damage an issue? He is simply meant to poke at people. Could his damage really be that bad? Let's get a nice reference first. Sword has a consistent M1 DPS of 60, which is considered to be pretty decent. However, that's a melee character, so let's look at a ranged character with a similar role of dealing basic damage. Rocket has around 50 DPS with direct shots and about 33 DPS with indirect explosion damage. Medkit can also get a pretty decent DPS with headshots, and with body shots it's not that crazy. Now let's look at the higher end of the range spectrum, with Hyper Laser having around 60 DPS with headshots and around 40 with body shots. Keep in mind that this is all only with M1s. Now let's look at our main subject. Slingshot is able to charge up a full primary shot in a second, allowing him to get only 35 DPS. However, if you choose to hover, you can double that number to 70 for a very brief moment. That might seem very good, but we will talk about why it becomes a bit of a problem in the next segments. For now, just know that your hover is going to be a pretty limited resource, but even though you do get a pretty good DPS, it also means you have to land more shots. Remember, this is all without abilities. With abilities, Hyper Laser's DPS spikes up to about above 100 with some quick burst damage, enough to shatter the health bars of most opponents. Rocket gets a triple rocket shot that he can use to unload a nice chunk of damage quickly as well. However, Slingshot's only burst move for damage is Scattershot, which while is pretty strong if you land every pellet, it has a lengthy cooldown of around 9 seconds. From further away, it deals minimal damage, and up close it's pretty easy to miss. It works alright to interrupt shield generation or as a solid kill confirm on running targets. Slingshot's finisher is Leg Day, which gives 3 large shots that each deal 100. It's a pretty solid ult that deals good damage, though it takes very long to use and it's very easy to miss. It's mostly a group damage move rather than a single target attack, but even as one it still does a fair job. There is one more attack that we haven't talked about yet, and that is Slingshot's M2, Heavy Hurler. Heavy Hurler can be charged up to 3 stages: Uncharged, which deals only 40 damage, Half Charge, which deals 55 damage and slows the opponent, and Full Charge, which is the ideal charge state that deals 70 damage and hits nearby opponents with decreasing damage, slowing everybody hit. It's a pretty good move to help Slingshot get some multiple target damage in, but its damage it deals is not crazy, and without teammates, Slingshot struggles to pick fights against multiple enemies anyways, so it seems a bit weird that Slingshot has this kind of ability. It doesn't help cover any specific weakness to notable extent, but it's still a nice thing to have, especially when supporting a team. As we finish up this section, you might be a bit confused. Slingshot's damage isn't really that bad, and it does kind of make sense for his expected playstyle. However, being a huge DPS source makes sense on a cooldown, though we'll use that to transition into our next section. Slingshot is described as a fast-moving mosquito. This was probably more true in the past, but in the present it's a bit of an understatement. Slingshot has 2 main forms of passive mobility, and by passive I'm referring to mobility that is active more overall in general, not his actual passive, though that is our first one. His ability to hover grants him some safety from melee fighters as he is lifted off the ground out of reach. His second form of mobility is the haste he gains from his abilities. If you didn't know, landing Heavy Hurler and Scattershot and hitting at least one enemy with them grants you a temporary 20% haste for 4 seconds. And you also just gain the stack of haste as well for simply using Sidestep, his dash ability. These are both neat forms of mobility to help Slingshot keep up on the battlefield, at least their concepts anyways. You can hover over the battlefield as you poke at enemies, and you get rewarded with movement speed for good performance to keep you moving like a mosquito. However, there are still some issues with how they work. The first is simply just how slow they are. The temporary haste from abilities only lasts 4 seconds, and although they can stack up, the speed disappears really quickly. However, the abilities themselves take over 8 seconds to reload each, meaning during a normal round, these buffs don't see that much uptime. We also have to factor in that Slingshot gives himself a 20% slow while charging at primaries, which mitigates an entire stack of the haste gained from his abilities. If you manage your cooldowns correctly, it is technically possible to have 20% haste uptime during the entire duration of the match, but then you're just moving at normal speed if you want to fire shots. Just a reminder that Shuriken gets a 20% haste for just existing. The second issue is arguably larger, that being his Hover. Hover is a great ability, don't get me wrong, but its cooldown is way too long. Hover is Slingshot's main way of dealing high consistent damage, but it is basically one of his only ways of staying safe from attackers. You only get a max of 2.5 seconds of hover time, and then you have to wait another 2.5 seconds to reload it. If you choose to deal damage with it, you can easily get caught off guard, unable to run away from assassins, but if you choose to hold it too much in case of defense, you lose out on a lot of damage. We should also mention that Slingshot's only other burst mobility is his sidestep, which while is a decent tool combined with hover, it's not very strong. That wouldn't be a big problem until we realize its cooldown is a whopping 9 seconds, which out of all his other abilities cannot reload until he touches the ground, which can extend the cooldown by more than 2.5 seconds if the player chooses to hover. The last thing I should mention is the fact that using Heavy Hurler, Scattershot, and Leg Day all freeze you in the air completely no matter how much haste you have. Scattershot is only for a brief moment, which is fine, and Leg Day is an ult that makes up for it by giving a large amount of haste anyways, and also only freezes for a short moment to fire ult shots, but Heavy Hurler is probably the biggest offender of all, taking over an entire second to fully use. Slingshot's hover already makes him a unique target for ranged attackers to shoot at, but if he chooses to stay low, he can get demolished by melees as well. Staying frozen allows both to capitalize off him, and overall conflicts with the idea of moving around quickly. The very idea of Heavy Hurler being a move in Slingshot's toolkit just feels very weird, as it contradicts his entire identity. Instead of being a weak attack in his quickly moving arsenal, it takes the longest to charge and packs a big punch, but at the costly drawback of being locked slowly in place with completely no movement available. Overall, there are a lot of limitations to his movement options that make his mobility feel very weak. His main counters are all assassins that can match or beat out his mobility, such as Biograph, Shuriken, and Coil, making his movement and his title of the Mosquito look like a complete joke. That helps us transition perfectly into this next section. Slingshot is extremely weak to both melee and ranged classes for the reasons covered earlier, but there is one class that is able to just treat Slingshot like a free kill. Assassins, as mentioned before, have very strong mobility and burst damage that help them catch up to and finish off targets. For the purpose of this section, we will be comparing Slingshot to Hyper Laser with some slight adjustments here and there since they are very similar. Hyper Laser has exceptional shot damage on its main attack. Slingshot has solid DPS on it as well, but requires more shots that can be easy to miss up close and also requires spending hover. Hyper Laser's secondary allows him to slow down dives, which can be very strong against Shuriken and Skateboard. Slingshot has a slowdown as well, and it's pretty strong, though it just requires a full second of charge up and standing still to use. The argument can be made that it can be used to stall for more airtime, though this just delays the problem of landing and making your next move and usage come even later. Moving on, Hyper Laser's Q is a very quick attack that can slow down and wireframe opponents, and also give Hyper and his teammates haste, which can lead to entire reversals of interactions with its pure devastating effects. Slingshot has a similar move to fill this role. While not as fast, his Q does deal really good damage to up-close targets, given that you don't miss. The last thing in both kits is a burst mobility tool. In Hyper Laser's kit, this is Evasive Maneuver, which is a very long slide that can be chained into a tall jump. If you choose to hold it down instead, it can be used as a pushback tool to activate wireframe easily and also just deal a bit of damage to finish off a potential assassin, while also giving some haste that can stack up with his grenades. Slingshot doesn't have a damaging usage for sidestep in this case, but it's noticeably a smaller dash. The last argument that can be made for Slingshot is his small mobility tools in the last section, though we've discussed why that isn't quite enough. Clearly, Hyper Laser is much better at defending himself from dives and can often have a favorable matchup with them with enough skill, which is strange seeing that he has more range and also more health. Like bro, why do you even need that armor? You're literally standing 20 miles away shooting when no one can reach you anyways. Slingshot on the contrary is much weaker at defending himself, despite the fact that he has lower health than Hyper Laser, lower damage than Hyper Laser, and also has to be much closer to the battle than Hyper Laser in most scenarios. What's the missing piece here? Mobility. While Slingshot does have more mobility than Hyper Laser, he desperately needs it more. But what he has right now just doesn't cover it. So if you didn't catch it, or just got lazy and skipped here for TLDR, Slingshot's mobility is pretty much just weaker than it should be, contradicting his title and intended playstyle. The main culprit to this is his hoverwalk passive being a tough decision for use between dealing decent damage and risking getting attacked, or keeping it for defense but dealing very weak damage overall. Additionally, it just has a very long cooldown. This, in effect, branches out into multiple issues. But I don't like to close videos without solutions, so here's some fun little ideas I thought of. Slingshot no longer self-inflicts 20% slow and 25% bound. This will keep him moving smoothly and allow his passive base to feel more present and also allow him to move around more gracefully. Passive haste stack duration increased to 6 seconds. This just helps feel like it is active more. Sidestep can start cooling down immediately instead of having to wait until you touch the floor. Slingshot shouldn't be penalized for playing the way he was made to be played. Otherwise, sidestep cooldown is reduced to 5 or 6 seconds so that it sees more usage. It is just a small dash after all, and would still be possibly countered by guys who have more mobility. This mostly just allows them to move around the battlefield better. And very lastly, hover and double jump can now be used even when the bar is not full, but will still subtract from the bar amount accordingly. This just rewards good resource management and also gives more accessibility and usage. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you to everyone who stuck around for the whole thing. If you like the style of video and want to see more, make sure to subscribe so you get notified when I make something new. And also check out my Discord server where I'll be showing off even more cool stuff. I don't have that much to say anymore, so have a great day!